All right. Joining us now, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. Congressman Kinzinger is a lieutenant colonel in the Air National Guard. Also with us, distinguished lecturer at Stanford University and NBC News and MSNBC senior foreign affairs analyst Brett McGurk, who recently served as special presidential envoy for the global coalition to defeat ISIS at the State Department.
So, Congressman, we're not going to start with the softball on whether the United States ran out of ammunition or not before Donald Trump became president of the United States. But I do want to get your read on yesterday, what happened yesterday. Obviously, not only a lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats, a lot of our allies very concerned about the president deciding unilaterally to withdraw our troops from northern Syria and abandon our allies. What's your take, and what can Congress do to try to slow this down?
Well, I think it's two takes. So one of the reasons it was so concerning is because it seems so impulsive. I mean, literally Sunday night, we see this statement out of the White House, and then Monday morning, this tweet chain starts, and you know, saying things like, yeah, the Kurds have been great, but that's because we gave them a bunch of money and equipment. So that was very concerning to me. But the other thing is this, Joe, and this is what's important to remember. Everybody you know, you have your Rand Paul types that say things like endless wars, and they use these terms that, you know, are very fatiguing. But remember, when we had 150,000 troops in Iraq, people like Rand Paul were saying, hey, we're not against using force. We just think that maybe using special forces to actually work with the locals on the ground is the way to do it. That's exactly what this fight is. This fight is exactly how the special forces train locals to be able to do what we don't want to do. We don't want to have 100,000 military in the middle of Syria. So to say on the one hand that this is an endless war, and then on the other hand say we need to fight and use local forces, that's exactly what this is. You know, terrorists have not stopped being terrorists. They have not stopped wanting to destroy the United States. And the day we forget that and, quote unquote, bring everybody home because we're so war fatigued, they'll be back. And
the truth, as you know better than most congressmen, is many of these troops are being redeployed. They're not actually coming home. So it's not pulling out of a, quote, endless war. What are and so what's the purpose of having to say that? That's right. Why does the president have to then go on that tweet chain? So what are the implications now, just as a practical matter, of walking away from the SDF? As we've been talking about this morning, many of them wear American flags on their uniforms, been fighting shoulder to shoulder with our special operators. What happens from here? I see two big points with this. Number one, once again, the United States will have abandoned an ally. You look back, you know, whether it's Vietnam or basically a number of fights before or since. So what happens in the future battle, which inevitably will happen, where, you know, there's going to be a long history of war way into the future, are we going to be able to get locals to work with us? You look at the translators in Afghanistan that are still trying to get out that were promised visas. The second thing is it's quite possible the Kurds have to turn to Bashar al-Assad or to Iran, because, you know, they have a good relationship with Iran too. They're just great friends with us. If they have to turn to Iran for protection, we've just given up yet another area to them.
Brett McGurk, you have worked for 3 presidents in terms of the national security of this country. And there's an obvious danger to what occurred precipitously Sunday night, Monday morning with regard to the Kurds, northern Syria, Turkey. But there's also a certain sadness, many people think, to the way the decision was made and the impact the decision has had on the United States of America. Could you speak to that sadness when it arises from the ignorance of the President of the United States about our alliances, our allies, our role in the world?
Yeah, I think that's a key point, and I'm really honored to be on with the Congressman, and this just gets to your question. When people like Congressman Kinzinger volunteer to wear the sacred cloth of our nation and serve in the U.S. military, there's an expectation that decisions made by the Commander-in-Chief of what they're going to be doing in the world will be taken with deliberation, consultation, prudence, discussion with allies, consideration with Congress. And so what is so troubling here, you can debate the merits of Syria policy, it's a complex situation, but for decisions to be made impulsively after a call with a foreign leader who does not share our interests, this is really kind of an uncharted territory. And that is what is so disturbing. These are the most consequential decisions a president can make. These are matters of war and peace. Presidents do a lot of things. When it comes to these types of decisions, they have to be made carefully, with prudence and deliberation. And that's what we're not seeing. And to have these impulsive tweets come down in matters of war and peace and what we're going to be doing in one of the most complicated parts of the world, it puts our nation at risk, and it puts our people on the ground in Syria. And I'm thinking about them. And I spent a lot of time in Syria over the last few years, and I know the folks out there, and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They were sent to do a mission, and now the president seems to have simply pulled the rug out from under them.
The president, perhaps listening to our conversation, and to Congressman Kinzinger, is tweeting right now a defense of his decision in Turkey with the hashtag #EndlessWars. So using that endless war terminology again. Guys, sit tight for 1 second. I want to bring in from Istanbul, Turkey, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel. Richard, what are you hearing on the ground there? Was this move as big a surprise to the Turks as it was to many here in the U.S.?
So, of course, everyone wants to end endless wars. But there is now a great deal of confusion as President Trump has signaled to the Kurds' enemy, to our allies' enemy, to Turkey, that it could go ahead and carry out a military offensive. That is damaging. That is telling our allies that we don't have their backs. Then President Trump backtracked that slightly, issuing this threat to Turkey in this tweet, in that saying that in his unmatched wisdom, he's going to harm the Turkish economy, or obliterate the Turkish economy if the Turks go too far. What it's done is made our allies not sure if the Americans have their backs, and made the Turks not sure if they can go ahead with this operation. So what we're hearing right now is that the U.S. posture in Syria hasn't changed. U.S. forces are still there. They are not packing. They have not been ordered to pack. They are still co-located with the Kurdish allies. Only a few, 2 small units, around 50 people, have pulled back from the actual Turkish border. But the American forces are still there. But they are not sure what's going to happen next. Will this order that the president issued by tweet actually be carried out? So far, they haven't received any specific orders through their change of command. So they're in a wait-and-see mode, but they're worried about the psychological damage. They're worried that President Trump has just signaled to Turkey and to the rest of the world that he really doesn't care what happens to people who sacrifice their lives and sacrifice their causes for an alliance with the United States.
Sounds like they're just as confused as many people in the American government were by the president's announcement. NBC's Richard Engel in Istanbul. Richard, thanks so much. Elise?
Congressman, another question just to follow up. You had said that the allegations that Donald Trump abused his power by withholding aid from the Ukrainians was very disturbing on September 26th. But it was just based on one whistleblower, and it was hearsay. Does it change? Does your assessment of the situation change at all now that there is a second whistleblower with direct knowledge of the conversation coming forward?
No, it doesn't change because I don't know the details. Look, there's a lot of people that are jumping to say impeachment. That's a big jump. Now, I've said we need to find out what happened. The problem that the Democrats did, and this is their massive mistake, is they called it an impeachment inquiry and not just an inquiry into what happened. And they did that before any of this information came out. What I say is we want answers to this question, but to jump on and say, I want to be part of an impeachment inquiry that has a definitive end state to something that very well may be wrong, but not to the level of impeachment, is where they made a big mistake. So I think there can be Republicans that are concerned about this and that say at no point should a president involve, frankly, a foreign leader in anything in diplomatic politics. But to now jump to that must terminate with impeachment, or if you don't agree that it does lead to impeachment, which, by the way, a lot of Democrats, you had a guest on an hour ago that said he's not willing to say that. Anything short of that is 100% defense of what the president did. There can't be both extremes in this. There have to be opportunities to say it may be wrong, but not impeachable.
So we can wait. Of course, it makes sense to wait to get all the facts in, and before making a decision on what the consequences will be for these phone calls. And of course, you saw the text messages between all the president's men on this matter. But again, just to clarify, though, based on what you've heard the president admit to doing, you are very concerned, right? That the president admitted. Yeah. That he asked the president of Ukraine to actually interfere in America's election by digging up dirt on Joe Biden, right?
Yes. I mean, look, it's concerning to me. I don't think any foreign leader should have any involvement in U.S. domestic politics, especially in an election. And so, yeah, it's very concerning. And I think it could be very wrong. I'm not saying it's impeachable, though. We just don't know enough at this point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Point taken. Brett McGurk, could you underline for me, and for the viewers, actually, could you underline for the viewers just the importance of understanding the scale and the scope of this small footprint in northern Syria, and how actually all of the terrible mistakes that we have made over the past 2 decades in the Middle East, all of the blunders actually led to a point where the best and the brightest in the United States military and the intel services got together and figured out how to have a small footprint that somehow effectively managed to push back the Russians, the Iranians, destroy ISIS, or at least certainly hobble ISIS, as well as our other enemies in that region. So when people talk about endless wars and huge deployments, that doesn't relate to what's happening here. Can you explain exactly how precise and how effective this deployment has been?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, because it's a really important point. When we designed this campaign, we really tried to learn all the lessons of the past and tried to address this concern in the country about so-called endless wars. And we did a couple things. First, it's going to be very special forces driven. That means we're not going to have Americans in major combat operations. Second, we're going to have a large coalition. We built the largest coalition in history, 80 countries. We have 22 military partners cooperating with us. And particularly in Syria, right now, we have about 1,000 Americans on the ground. That's it. They have helped enable and build a force of 60,000 Syrians. And they're not just Kurds. They're Arabs, they're Christians, and they work as a fairly cohesive unit. And they now basically have control over 1/3 of Syria. But our 1,000 people on the ground, they are special forces. We're not spending that much money. We're not taking casualties. So if this is an endless war and we can't do this, then I think we really lose our options in the future. And, you know, the president just seems to be mistaken, because he tweeted yesterday, he seems to believe that if we get out of Syria, we still preserve all of our options. He said if ISIS comes back, we can go back in and blast. That's literally what he said. Well, with who? Who's going to come with us? Who's going to sign up with us? Who's going to give us the intelligence? This took years to build. It's been very successful. Our commitment is very small. And to just pull the stakes up without thinking about what comes next, again, we're increasing the risk to our people. And the value of the American handshake, which I've been saying, as a diplomat, when you're around the world and you're trying to sign people up to do hard things, that's what we do. The value of American handshake really matters. And to our diplomats around the world right now, that value of their handshake is depreciating, because everybody knows they don't really speak for the president, and the president might do something totally different the next day. So it just makes it hard to run the country.
Yeah. Adam Kinzinger, I'm just reading a New York Times headline, the Trump administration blocking a top diplomat, Gordon Sondland, from talking in a deposition, appearing for a deposition in the impeachment probe. I mean, where do you stand on getting the answers? You said we don't have enough information. Should people come forward and testify?
Yeah, I think within, of course, the framework of the law, if it's a legal subpoena and the administration doesn't have a reason to block it that's legitimate, then I think they should. And this will probably just be another fight. But I want to make a quick point on what Brett said, and I've known him for a while now in both our capacities. It does make a point when the president changes his mind in the morning. It's hard for a diplomat who we need to empower to prevent war around the world to basically be empowered for things like conflict resolution. And so whether it's that or whether it's things like, you know, this investigation. But I will say this, too. The Democrats need to be very careful to just automatically jump to saying impeach, 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 because that creates a lot of mistrust. It may be good for their base, but it creates a lot of mistrust. And that's where we're at as a country right now.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you so much for being on the show this morning.
Yeah.
Brett McGurk, thank you as well.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.